Okay, hello and welcome to another criminal law capsule. And this capsule is hopefully going to be a short capsule designed to give you an introduction and overview into the way in which Canadian criminal law categorizes different types of offenses. And really, this is designed to be useful material to help you contextualize other information we're going to discuss. So this is speaking to my students. I don't need you to memorize this information. It's really for you to understand other things you're going to see, especially as you look through the criminal code, and really try to understand the different categories of offenses that exist. Now, I really want you to understand from the outset that the categories that I'm going to talk about are most important in terms of the procedures by which people get tried. So in other words, when I talk about the different categories, it doesn't really affect the substance of the crime and what we're going to talk about mostly in class. When I talk about the different categories, as I'll come to in just a moment, the different categories and class that a person gets slotted into really affects the procedure and what's going to happen to them, the way in which they're processed through the system, the trial, and the punishment. Those are the big things that change depending on which class of or which category of offense that they face. So maybe that's a bit abstract. Let's get it much more concrete as we go forward. So let's start with the biggest category, and this used to be the only category. It used to be that when you were charged with a crime, you were charged formally on indictment. You've heard that, I'm sure. You were indicted. It was a formal piece of paper. They wrote down exactly what you did. If you have a criminal code or you don't, open up the web and look at section 236, manslaughter. Everyone who commits manslaughter is guilty of an indictable offense. Okay? You are charged on indictment. Now, what does that actually mean? It's a big word. It means that the Crown has to present a formal indictment that spells out exactly what you did and why they believe you have committed a manslaughter. But more importantly, when they charge you on indictment, what it means is it engages a whole host of procedures that are triggered by the word indictment that flow throughout the entire criminal code. And there are a host of offenses that are called indictable offenses. So that is the first category offense you need to be aware of. And today, indictable offenses that used to dominate the code are really reserved for the most serious crimes. Manslaughter, murder is an indictable offense, kidnapping is an indictable offense, and there's a host of others that you'll see as we go through the criminal code. There are some exceptions to this. There are some less serious ones, and they're mostly historical examples. It is very rare today for the government to enact an indictable offense at all, a strict indictable. They don't do that very often, as I'll come to in a moment. But there are some exceptions that are historical. For example, section 345 of the criminal code is a good historical example. Robbing a mail truck. You know, not the most severe crime. There are other versions of robbery that are not indictable, but robbing a mail truck is. It's a straight indictable offense simply because historically that was viewed as a very severe offense. Category number 2, summary conviction offenses. And they mean exactly what they say. The word summary was given that word, summary conviction, because the idea was that the procedure was designed to be a summary procedure, in that it was meant to be a shorter, more compact, easier procedure. You don't get the full package of rights as you do in an indictable procedure. It is still, you have to have something written down. You are charged in what's called an information. But everything about a summary conviction proceeding is less formal. So for example, how about section 442, interfering with boundary lines? It's a crime to pull down or remove anything set up as a boundary line on land, but it's only punishable by summary conviction. It is not serious enough to warrant being prosecuted on indictment. So what's the difference? Well, summary conviction offenses are less serious in every way. Punishments are always lower. The default punishment for a summary conviction offense is a maximum term of imprisonment of not more than 2 years less a day and a fine of $5,000. Now, there are a few offenses for which that's elevated, but by and large, that's what you're facing for summary conviction offenses. For indictable offenses, it's life imprisonment sometimes, 14 years, 12 years, much higher penalties. That's number one. Number two, procedure. Summary convictions are always judge alone. There are no jury trials for summary conviction offenses, ever. Indictable offenses are sometimes jury trials, but usually you have the option of a jury trial. And finally, summary conviction offenses are always or almost always before the lowest court, the provincial court, whereas indictable offenses are almost always before the superior court, the higher court, because they are deemed to be the more sophisticated, the more important types of crime. So, straightforward, indictable offenses, the more serious offenses, summary conviction, the less serious offenses. And now we'll complicate it just a little bit, because there is a third category, in fact, which most crimes fall into, which are called hybrid offenses. And hybrid offenses essentially are offenses for which you have the option of both proceedings. It can be either indictable or summary conviction. So for example, sexual assault is a very common crime, and if you look at section 271 of the criminal code, so pause this and go look at section 271, section 271 can be charged either way, as an indictable crime, punishable by up to 10 years, or as a summary conviction offense, punishable by no more than 18 months. And as you can imagine, that's a big gap, and those are maximums. But that's a huge gap. So essentially, you have a difference between the two. Now, who gets to choose? The prosecution does. Essentially, what happens with a hybrid offense is that the prosecution has the option of choosing, as soon as they lay the charge, do we want to proceed indictably or do we want to proceed on summary conviction? And hybrid offenses are becoming more and more popular because sexual offending is, as you might imagine, a very broad crime. There are all sorts of sexual assaults. They range from the fairly minor, and I don't want to trivialize any sexual offending, but there are obviously sexual assault, as you will come to see, is a very broad-ranging offense. For example, groping someone is a sexual assault, and that's on the relatively minor end, and a full-fledged rape, where you throw someone down and violently rape them, that is also a sexual assault. So as you can imagine, there's a wide range of offending, and that will help the Crown decide whether or not they wish to go indictably or on summary conviction. That's their choice. There are other things that you will want to consider, or the Crown will want to consider, when deciding which way to go. One of the most important is a section you'll want to come to know about, section 786 sub 2 of the Criminal Code. And it states that summary conviction offenses have a limitation period of 6 months. You can only charge someone for up to 6 months after the offense took place for summary conviction offenses. And that is essentially Parliament's way of saying, look, if something is not that serious, you can only charge it for 6 months. And after that, people have to be able to go on with their lives. Indictable offenses have no limitation period. So essentially, once a sexual assault passes the 6-month period, you can only charge it indictably. So that is one way of thinking about the way in which the Crown decides which way they're going to charge. That's certainly one factor they would consider. You might think that the prosecution would say, well, they'll abuse their power. I don't think that's true at all. I think the prosecution really thinks very carefully about a lot of different factors when deciding whether to charge indictably or on summary conviction. They will look at the offender. They will think about whether the offender has done this before. The most important factor, as I said, is the seriousness of the offending. But trust me, the prosecution does not want to go indictably if they don't have to. There's a lot more procedure. It's a lot more time consuming. If they can, they will always go on summary conviction. It's only where it really warrants it that the prosecution is likely to proceed on indictment. Now finally, we've talked a little bit about provincial offending and provincial offenses, and just very briefly, I just want to talk about provincial offending. Now, first of all, provincial offenses do not proceed on indictment. They don't have indictable offenses. Provincial offenses raise a lot of different issues. Most provinces, I can't talk across the board here because it's different, most provinces adopt the code for procedure. And what I mean by that, almost every province has what's called an Offences Act or a Provincial Offences Act. And if you look at those, they either set out their own summary conviction offense type regime, or they simply adopt the criminal code. But we don't have to worry about that. You can just assume for what we're doing that most provincial offenses that have the potential of jail time, because I want to talk about real offenses. I don't want you to confuse offenses with like parking tickets, because that's not what we're talking about here. Those are more like administrative transgressions. But when we're talking about real offenses, most provincial offenses, just think of them like summary conviction offenses. In any event, that's all I really want to talk to you, just give you a nice little overview into the different types of offenses, which I think will give you some context moving forward so that you understand the way in which offenses are categorized. Hope that was useful to you, and have a great day.